Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Gilo Logan. We are planning to talk about the history of African American in Evanston, and also talk about the initiative that the city took related to reparation. But before we go into the subject, I want to welcome Dr. Gilo. Dr. Gilo, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
Thank you, Brother Alpha. It's great to be here. Thank you for the honor.
So as we talk about the subject, is Evanston and reparation. But before we go into it, just can you tell me about you, about your background?
Yeah, I'm a fifth generation Evanstonian. On my dad's side, my father's side, we came from the Logan plantation in South Carolina. And on my mom's side, my father's mom's side, we come from New Madrid, Missouri. From there to Muscatine, Iowa, and from Muscatine, Iowa into Evanston. So on my mom's side, we came from Canada in around 1895 to Evanston. Apparently, our family went north on the Underground Railroad. And then after slavery ended sometime, three sisters came to the U.S. One sister came to Chicago, one came to Evanston, which is my great grandmother, and then one went to Glencoe. So I'm a fifth generation Evanstonian. Currently, I'm a leadership and diversity consultant. So I run Dr. Logan Consulting. So we develop cultural competencies for organizations and individuals and teams and leaders. So that's my work. I'm a father of three sons, a husband to my wife, and a care provider for my dad.
Great. For the people who don't know the city of Evanston, can you describe to us the geographic location of the city compared?
Sure. Yeah, we're the first suburb north of Chicago. So we share the border of Howard Street with Chicago. So Chicago is the border to our south. Lake Michigan is the border to our east. Wilmette is our border to the north, and Skokie is our border to the south. So Evanston, there's about 78,000 people here. It's a relatively small community. It's about 7 square miles, and but this is the place that we call home.
We know through history, often when African American was leaving the South for diverse causes and settled into the Chicago area, often they settled in the South side of Chicago. So when did they start settling in Evanston?
African American?
Yes.
Right, actually, so Evanston, so Northwestern was founded first in 1855. And then the founder, John Evans of Northwestern, is Evanston. So then that's where the name Evanston came from. And that was 1857. And actually, Black people were coming here at that time. So the first African Americans came in around the mid 1850s. And by 1880, there were over 100 Black African Americans in Evanston. And by the 1900s, there were over 700. And that's again around the time that my mom's family came here from the migration from Canada down to the US. So from around the mid 1850s onward, Black people started populating Evanston. And then by 1940 already there were, there were over 6,000 Black people in Evanston.
Was it easy to settle? And did they all settle in the same area, or were they able to settle in different parts of the city?
Yeah, no, settlement was not easy. We were here from the beginning, and then actually the houses on the lakefront on the east side of Evanston, those were like big mansions, which you'll still see them there here today. And actually we had a lot of Black people who populated that part of Evanston. And because of redlining and some of the institutional racism, they couldn't get loans for their homes. They couldn't get mortgages. They couldn't get loans to do the repair work, so they lost their houses, and many of them were forced to move from the lakefront. So you have what's now historically known as the Fifth Ward in Evanston. So that's the predominantly Black ward. And by even by 1940, almost 85% of all Black people lived in the Fifth Ward. So we were forced far west to the western border of Evanston, far away from downtown, far away from Northwestern. So that's where the segregation, and it was kind of like a wasteland. It wasn't really a nice geographical area, but that's where we were forced. And then, it was pretty much like 90% Black, the Fifth Ward. So that's where both sides of my family resided when they came to Evanston. So, and that was due to the racial discrimination.
I see. I'm assuming you were born in Evanston. How was it growing up in the city?
I consider Evanston to be my village. I think it's, of course I'm biased, but I think it's one of the greatest places to live. I mean, it's a beautiful community. It's a relatively well-educated community, very liberal, very activist oriented, very green city, lots of amenities here. There's a deep history, a strong identity with Evanston. So growing up here was great for my identity. I grew up in a very diverse community. So even from elementary school onward, I was going to school with children from many different races, many different ethnicities. And that was all part of my experience growing up. And that helped to shape and mold who I am as an African American. However, it was very diverse, but it was very segregated. So you will still see that today. There's great residential segregation, and there's great socioeconomic segregation that you'll still see here in Evanston today.
Can you give us a few examples, something very specific that you can share?
Sure. Yeah. The life expectancy today in the Black community is almost 13 years less than in Evanston. The Black community has a life expectancy of almost 13 years less than the white community just north of us. And so there's a lot of factors that have contributed to that. Myself, my father, my mother, my brother, my father, my sister, we were all born in community hospitals. So that was the quote unquote Black hospital in Evanston in the Fifth Ward in the Black community. So that was founded around 1914. And then there's the Emerson Street YMCA, because we were not allowed to go to the YMCA. So that was founded around the same time. And my father, although he was a police officer and he could provide security to the YMCA, but he couldn't go there as a patron. He was not allowed to because he was Black. So we had our own hospital. We had our own business district on Church and Dodge. We had our own YMCA. And we had foster school because the schools were very segregated as well. And foster school was where most of the Black people went at that time. So that's all a result of the segregation that you see here in Evanston today.
So what did the leaders of the city have to do to deal with these issues and improve the life of African American in the city?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done still. However, you did have a lot of people who advocated for the rights and for the liberties and for the freedom of African Americans. So, you had, mind you, mostly, Black people were fighting for it, but you also had allies and accomplices who were white, who were also fighting for our rights as well. So one well-known, the first Black city council member in Evanston was Edwin B. Jourdain Jr. And this is around the time of W.E.B. Du Bois, around 1940. So he was in communication with him, explaining about the segregation in Evanston. So Mr. Jourdain, who now there's a community center named after him, the Fleetwood Jourdain Community Center, he was very central towards fighting for the liberties and for the rights of Black Evanstonians. So he got into the system, into the city council, to try to institute and implement some change in Evanston for our benefit.
I know you talk about your father, who was a police official, and recently, following the social media events, he was celebrated among leaders in the community. Can you tell us a little bit about your father?
Yeah, and there's a lot to say, but I'll keep it brief because we could be here the whole 40 minutes for that. But he graduated. So he grew up in the Fifth Ward. He grew up very poor. He graduated from Evanston Township High School in 1951, where he was a basketball, football, and baseball player. He was the first Black football captain at ETHRT, Evanston Township High School, the first Black football player to receive the Myerson's Award for Excellence in Football. And he was the first Black homeroom president and the first Black senior class vice president at Evanston Township High School. Then he went on to Western Illinois University. He played football on a scholarship. He was drafted in the Korean War. And there he received numerous medals and honors and recognitions for his service. Excuse me. And then after being discharged around 1957 is when he joined the Evanston Police Department. And from there, he was the first African-American lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, and the chief of police until he retired in 1987. So during that time, he was also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s bodyguard, which he was also recognized for. And during that time, he also received the police department's highest award for valor, for outstanding performance, for going above and beyond the call of duty, for essentially placing his life in jeopardy to free a hostage and to disarm a felon. So he was recognized for that. He's a graduate of the FBI Academy. He's the co-founder of NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, with over 4,000 members in Washington, D.C. He's co-founder of FAM, Fellowship of African American Men, a basketball league that's been in Evanston for over 50 years. He's the co-founder of the Chessmen that has been in existence for over 60 years, a group of professional Black men that raise money and provide scholarships for Black students going to college and for elders who need food. So that's that, and that's just some of his accomplishments.
Growing up under that huge umbrella, how did your father guide you as a citizen in Evanston on what they expect from you in the community in Evanston?
Yeah. Yeah, so my father, he led by example. I mean, he showed us how to live, how to be, how to serve by the example that he exemplified, just through his community service work, his activism, his work within the various institutions. Because when he retired from the police department, he also served as the head of security at Evanston Township High School for almost 20 years. So we saw him serve and we saw how he did it. And that was the example. That was the standard. Like in our family, the expectation is that you give back to your community. You give back to your village. And we saw that being lived out by my grandparents, my father, my mom. And hence, so in our community, there's a great expectation for many of us who have the last name Logan. There's a great expectation, and hence there was a lot of pressure growing up to kind of meet some of those expectations.
You refer to Evanston as a village,
Yeah.
and basically, I would like to ask about the population of the village when you come to African American. Are the population is increasing or is decreasing?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So, yeah, so I'll put it to you this way: the Black population is decreasing, although the population in Evanston in general is increasing. So, for example, between the last two census, Evanston was depopulated over 8,000 Black people in a 10-year period. And it's a variety of factors. I mean, there was the housing, the crash with the housing, and it was 2008, I think it was. Of course, there's the segregation. There's the fact that in every community in Evanston, they have a community school except for in the Black ward, in the Fifth Ward. So that's the only community without a community school, and a school helps to ground a community. So there's no school there. We lost the community hospital. We lost the Emerson Street YMCA. We lost a lot of our business district, and that was part of what depopulated the Black population in Evanston. I mean, there's other factors as well, but those are some of the primary ones. And so currently today, we're about 18% of the population of 78,000 people.
Listening to you, basically, we have to kind of acknowledge that Evanston reflect in many ways situations around the country
Oh yeah.
in which African American are going through a lot of challenges. But at certain point, I believe the mayor of Evanston was the African American woman, if I'm not mistaken. What did she? What was the leaders? What were they able to do to help the community overcome those challenges and implement a more fair playing ground?
Yeah.
And another question is, what are you doing today as community leaders to emphasize those issues and trying to deal with them?
Yeah, I would say for one, community activism at the grassroots level. You have a lot of, Black, brown, and white community activists. But you had historically, like the Honorable Lorraine Morton, who was the first Black mayor at Evanston, who our city council, our city hall is named after her. She, people like her, like my father, like Sam Hicks, he was the first fire chief, first Black fire chief. They got into the institutions and they tried to bring about change, they tried to address the systemic racism and the structures of racism. So that's what they did. They got into the institutions, they learned how to play by the rules, and they learned how to change the institutions playing by the rule with the support from the community. So for example, my father, when he was a police officer, he was part of a group of 20 Black police officers who actually sued the city of Evanston and the city manager for racial discrimination. So they put their jobs on the line, their livelihood, to sue their boss. So they used every measure that they had, from grassroots level activism, from getting within the institutions. They used the legal system. They brought about, Evanston was the first northern city to integrate all of its elementary schools in 1967. So that was a push primarily from the Black community. So those are some of the ways that we've brought about some of the change here, and to hold our elected leaders, our community leaders, to hold them accountable, which we're still trying to do today. And so one result of that is the reparations, movement that many people are familiar with in Evanston, to try to repair the harm, repair the damage that was done due to the racial discrimination.
As activists, we know all that the road to justice requires hard work and patience. But at the end, we believe and always have hope, justice will prevail.
Yeah.
Evanston have made history by being one of the cities that accept at least to provide reparation for its African American community. How do you view that initiative as a resident of Evanston?
Yeah. First, I would say I'm very proud to be an Evanstonian. I'm proud to be, I wasn't at the forefront of that, but I was part of that movement, and I was one of the supporters and one of the people out there pushing for the reparations. So I feel in general, it's revolutionary, it's long overdue, it's much needed. Personally, I am proud and happy that we did it. However, saying that, it's not perfect by any measure. So mostly the reparations was about repairing the harm and damage done from the residential segregation, and hence like home ownership, or the lack of home ownership. So now a lot of the money, so there's families that qualify for like $25,000, in a sense, a stipend, but it goes towards particular things. It can go towards home ownership, it can go towards home improvement, or mortgage assistance. So again, trying to repair the harm that was done due to the redlining and the institutional racism. So it's not perfect by any measure, because $25,000 does not cover it. The damage that was done. Housing is not the only element, but it's a start. It's a start. So I know there's a lot of opponents, a lot of Black people in our community who are against it. my thing is it's not perfect, but it's a start, and I'm very proud that we have it.
So why you think they are against the initiative, considering at least the city is trying to, you know, to repair the injustice that have been done in the past?
Yeah. You know, I think some of it is the multi-generational trauma that we as Black people have experienced, because this historical, you know, the racism has been historical. And historically speaking, you know, a lot of Black people, we're very aware that, you know, what we ask for is not what we are necessarily given, right? So we're asking for a lot more than $25,000 in just the housing, but that's what we were given. And hence people are in opposition to that. They feel like we're settling for less. They feel like it's very insufficient, which I agree is very insufficient. But as I mentioned before, it's a start. But some people, and again, in the Black community, feel like we're settling. And then you have the notion that, you know, so like my family can get $25,000, we can put it towards the repair of our home, but then we might hire contractors who are white, right? So then the money's not being spent in the Black community. So there's a lot of critiques along those lines, which a lot of it has a lot of validity. As I mentioned, it's not perfect. There's a strong resistance against it, but mostly, I think in our community, people are for it here in Evanston.
So what can you do as the leaders to improve that initiative and make it better?
Yeah, we got to keep pushing. We got to keep fighting. We got to stay on the megaphone. We got to keep it public. We have to keep calling them out. We have to keep holding our institutions, our institutional leaders, our elected officials accountable, and to not settle for less. We cannot fall complacent with this $25,000. And again, it's only, you know, it's not even 100+ families that qualified for that. So we just have to keep pushing, keep fighting, keep calling out our institutions, getting into the institutions, bringing about the systemic change from within. And I think that's how we're going to push for a better day.
Yeah, but listening to around the country, when the issue of reparation is mentioned, there are many voices that oppose reparation. What is your views on those voices that believe that reparation should not occur and it should not be based on money? How do you, what is your response?
Yeah, I need a half an hour to give a proper response, but in short, you know, arguably, no people have experienced the trauma that Black people have as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, nowhere in human history was there something like that. Slavery existed before, but not slavery as it was in the transatlantic slave trade, where people were property. The numbers of the tens of millions of Africans who were taken out of Africa and dehumanized, and who were, you know, labeled to be property and, you know, equal with animals and so on and so forth. So the repair, the damage is great, and the repair work needs to be. There's a lot of repair that needs to be done. So hence, when you look at, I think if people understood the history of the transatlantic slave trade, the history of institutional racism, the impact and the effect of that, people can better understand the importance and the need for reparations. Now, when the Japanese were in the camps, you know, after World War II, I think it was, there was a form of reparations that were given to them. You know, the Jews, they didn't get money per se, but they got a country. They got the country of Israel. So there was a form of reparations for them. So what we're asking for is not new. What we're demanding is not anything new, but we're not asking for something that's not deserved. Like it's our blood, our sweat, and our tears that have helped to build this country and all the institutions in the United States of America as we know it. And there's compensation that needs to happen as a result of the historical and the systemic oppression that we've experienced.
We must acknowledge at least that the city of Evanston did make history by providing a reparation as small as it is. What is the impact did you see any impact of that reparation in the community? And we only have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. And I will
Mhm.
give you the floor. Do you see any impact of that small contribution?
Sure.
in
I
the
would
community?
say for one, the impact I see is pride. I see a sense of identity, and I actually see homes being worked on and improved as a result of that, of the $25,000 that's going towards home renovations. It's increasing people's property value. And I can see that in our community. So it's a tangible result, seeing it in the homes, but also intangible in terms of like the identity and the pride that it brings.
Mr. Gilo, again, Dr. Gilo, again, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree. I believe there is many conversation
Yeah.
to be made in the future, and I would love to welcome you again to talk about other issues. But for today, I will take this opportunity to say thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
That would be great. Thank you for the honor, Brother Alpha. Anytime, anytime.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.